A source close to Janet Jackson describes the entertainment industry's most profound and harrowing secret, one that once left Michael Jackson visibly shaken with apprehension, as now beginning to surface in fragments. A somber, airless truth, potent enough to send shockwaves worldwide once one understands it was the very force that dragged him toward the greatest tragedy of his life. Behind the blinding glare of stage lights, he was compelled to carry intangible burdens, navigate subtle conflicts, and endure shadows no one dared to name in public. This is not merely the story of a legend. It reads like the agonizing cry of a soul pushed to its absolute breaking point. Before we go deeper, stay with this report so you don't miss what lies underneath. Few could imagine that a man living at the center of the brightest spotlight, lifted by a hurricane of applause, would quietly whisper, deep in the darkest corner of his private life, a sentence that sounded almost unreal, yet sent a chill down the spine. "They're trying to kill me." This was not an official statement, nor was it captured in any record or document. It existed only through scattered recollections from crew members who worked with him and from people close to him, those who still remember the moment Michael Jackson looked down at his slightly trembling hands as if he himself were startled by the words he had just spoken. Whether it was a confession born of exhaustion or an unconscious sigh, the sentence left a lasting mark, forcing anyone who heard it to ask an unavoidable question. What could drive a figure of such magnitude to carry fear of that kind? Inside the entertainment world, those who know it from within understand that no place is ever fully illuminated. This industry does not operate like the soft red carpet the public imagines. It functions more like a complex labyrinth where people are worn down by expectations, contracts, and unspoken rules no one dares to articulate. Michael Jackson was no exception. In the final years of his life, he was pulled into a relentless vortex so severe that even longtime collaborators later admitted something had gone fundamentally wrong. Not because he was physically weak, but because the environment surrounding him had become suffocating. Endless rehearsals, overlapping agreements, and ever-growing financial obligations merged into a constant pressure that left him with almost no space to breathe. The story becomes even more layered when viewed through the broader social context he carried throughout his life. Michael lived in a body inseparable from the history of a community that had endured deep injustice. Though globally adored and unconditionally celebrated for his talent, he remained acutely aware, through subtle acknowledgments in interviews, that parts of the industry regarded him with a mixture of admiration and caution. Those sensitive to nuance could see how profoundly this duality exhausted him. To stand on the world stage, he had to do more than create, perform, and transcend artistic limits. He also had to quietly withstand prejudices embedded deep within popular culture. Rarely spoken aloud, yet felt every single day. It was precisely this contrast between unrivaled glory and profound solitude that made the phrase, "They're trying to kill me," so deeply unsettling. It did not point to any specific individual, but rather reflected a vague, consuming dread, the sensation of being cornered with no remaining escape. People close to him recalled that Michael became more vigilant, more guarded, less trusting. His life was consumed by a relentless schedule, endless meetings, and the crushing weight of expectations surrounding his return. What exactly he feared or whom he perceived in the shadows, no one could say. And perhaps that ambiguity itself was the most frightening element, amplifying everything that weighed on him. Public records from this period show that Michael had almost no time for himself while preparing for This Is It, a project so massive that it seemed the breath of the entire world rested on his shoulders. No one denied that he wanted to return, that he wanted to shine one last time. Yet those present in the rehearsal rooms recounted moments of complete exhaustion. Michael sitting silently, head buried in his hands, surrounded by a heavy stillness that unsettled everyone. No shouting, no complaints, just a quiet collapse. One account, passed along repeatedly, recalls his voice reduced to a whisper. "This pressure is too much. No document confirms it, yet the detail endures as a painful fragment of truth. All of these elements converge into a reality that feels impossible to ignore. Michael Jackson was pushed to his absolute limit. When a person is driven that far, emotions become fragile, perceptions darken, and even unconscious words take on disproportionate weight. What makes this story uniquely tragic is the stark contradiction at its center. Ahead of him stood a colossal stage, waiting to be illuminated, while behind it lay a spirit worn thin, torn between humanity's immense expectations and his own inherent fragility. The industry demanded that he continue to shine, even as the silent void within his mind widened day by day. If one speaks of the so-called industry secret, the subject of countless rumors later on, this period was its true origin. It was not a cinematic conspiracy, but a systemic reality. The way individuals are driven to complete exhaustion, so the machine never stops running. Many within the industry whispered that Michael had been placed in a position where stopping was not an option, that his schedule was far too dense for someone already burdened by prolonged fatigue. No one dared to confirm it publicly. The only certainty was that the pressure was real and destructive. Most heartbreaking of all is this: regardless of where that phrase originated or what it truly referred to, it remains the clearest sign of a man who felt utterly alone within the very world he once commanded. And that solitude stands as the greatest contradiction of Michael Jackson's life, a man loved by millions, yet understood by almost no one, carrying within him a soul as fragile as glass. Within the charged stillness of the rehearsal room, intensified by every measured step and repeated movement, a heavier conflict settled over Michael, one that did not announce itself but pressed inward relentlessly. He stood at the center of the operation, yet those close to him sensed he felt pulled forward by forces no one else could see. The entertainment industry labeled it process, commitment, preparation. From an observational standpoint, however, it functioned more like a tightening restraint. Michael understood, without it being spoken aloud, that behind every spotlight lay a cascade of obligations compelling him to move forward even as his body and mind showed unmistakable signs of depletion. Witnesses from this period consistently described him as appearing absorbed, distant, as though searching for an exit in a maze he never intended to enter. It was positioned as the defining return of his career, yet several recalled moments when he studied the rehearsal schedule and fell into a dense silence, the kind that suggested a single breath might fracture the weight pressing down on him. Rehearsals were compressed, expectations absolute, financial commitments immense. Alongside these demands was an unspoken requirement that he must once again prove his ability to electrify the stage. Together, these forces created a tension stretched as tight as a drumhead. Rumors circulated quietly that he had been placed in a position where stopping was not an option. There is no official documentation to confirm this. Still, accounts from those who interacted with him describe unsettling moments, such as when he softly asked whether a few rehearsals could be reduced, his voice barely audible, his expression less a request than a plea for brief relief. Observers noted that his eyes conveyed exhaustion rather than negotiation. What sharpened the strain was the contradiction in how the industry perceived him. Michael was treated simultaneously as an untouchable legend and as a commodity upon which enormous structures depended. One side elevated him with honors, the other expected him to carry an overwhelming share of responsibility. This imbalance created a persistent internal conflict, as though he were being divided. One part offered endlessly to the public, the other struggling to preserve something private and intact. As these pressures mounted, the so-called open secrets of the industry revealed themselves. Not conspiracies, but unspoken rules widely understood. Standing on the world stage requires sacrifices far beyond public comprehension. A former collaborator once remarked that no artist is allowed to run out of energy. In isolation, the statement seems routine. In context, it became another layer of pressure bearing down on someone already near exhaustion. An internal account described Michael's life at that time as reduced to 3 recurring states: rehearsing, meeting, and worrying. He ate less, slept less, and smiled less. When he did smile, it appeared practiced, as if maintaining stability around him depended on that expression. Several crew members quietly acknowledged concern, exchanging glances and whispers. "He's not well." Yet no one confronted it openly, perhaps because doing so would require acknowledging a reality too destabilizing to face. It was during this phase that the phrase, "they're trying to kill me," entered the narrative with unsettling force. An assistant later recalled hearing it during a moment of intense strain, Michael's voice worn and strained, as though approaching surrender. What he meant remains unclear. Contracts, schedules, isolation, unresolved emotional wounds all remain possibilities. What disturbed listeners was not certainty, but the manner of its delivery. Spontaneous, constricted, alarmed, as if he perceived a threat not easily articulated. Even as an unverified account, within that context, it carried a chilling resonance. Though crowned the King of Pop, those familiar with his history recognized that the title masked a deeper struggle. Behind the acclaim was a man who navigated layers of scrutiny shaped by long-standing prejudice, directed at an artist who emerged from a community marked by historical inequity. Rarely discussed openly, this undercurrent formed another invisible pressure, one acutely felt by someone as sensitive as Michael, keeping his instincts suspended between trust and self-protection. A lesser-known behavior, recalled by multiple crew members, involved Michael stepping back briefly after crowded meetings. He would not speak or depart immediately, just pause, still, as if assessing whether he had exited a safe space or a room full of unseen hazards. To casual observers, it meant nothing. To those who watched him closely, it appeared to be a self-soothing ritual, a small defensive measure against pressures that had no clear form. The irony is that precisely because he was Michael Jackson, the focal point of global attention, it became nearly impossible for him to find support. Every movement was scrutinized, every decision analyzed, every sign of fatigue triggered reactions behind the scenes. In that environment, the phrase, "they're trying to kill me," sharpened into something more revealing. Not an accusation, but an expression of being pressed beyond endurance. If earlier moments hinted at unease, this period marked the tightening of those invisible restraints, tight enough that even an observer could feel the suffocation. And this, by all accounts, was only the surface. What followed, advancing quietly yet forcefully toward him, would soon overwhelm every remaining support, a development that demands closer examination in what comes next. When the rehearsal room door closed, Michael was no longer the legend the world projected onto him. He was simply himself, an exhausted body, a mind locked in constant vigilance, and a soul suspended between two realities: the glare of stage lights and the quieter world where he longed only for uninterrupted sleep, without jolting awake in the dead of night. Those who worked closest to him recalled that each time he stepped off the rehearsal floor, he often paused for several seconds, as if recalibrating his balance. Not from frailty, but from a system that had stretched him too far, for too long. One evening, a crew member later reported seeing Michael seated alone at the far end of a corridor, his head resting against the wall, hands clenched tightly, as though gathering the last fragments of strength to continue. No one approached. No one asked. They watched from a distance, recognizing a man struggling to hold himself together. The image stayed with them, precisely because they understood that beneath the familiar smile and disciplined professionalism, something was deeply wrong. Compounding everything was a documented and persistent condition: prolonged insomnia. This was not rumor, but a fact reflected in subsequent legal records. Several associates described nights when Michael did not sleep at all, instead sitting awake and staring through a window until morning. One trusted assistant recalled him speaking barely above a whisper, saying, "I can't rest." While the account was verbal, it aligned with every verified detail surrounding his condition, forming a picture that was difficult to confront. The cumulative effect of sleep deprivation left his emotions increasingly fragile and his anxiety heightened. It was not delusion, but what some described as shadows of pressure, a sense that any misstep would invite collapse. Crew members noticed his heightened vigilance, checking doors, scanning rooms, ensuring curtains were drawn. One person recalled hearing him murmur, "I feel unsafe." No record captured the phrase, but its authenticity lay in how precisely it matched his state. Exhausted, deprived of rest, and burdened by responsibility. As pressure reached its peak, a sentence began to surface with disturbing regularity. "They're trying to kill me." In this phase, the words appeared in a deeper context. A member of his entourage recalled Michael asking them to stand with him briefly one night, not requesting help, simply presence. Looking down at his hands, he reportedly said, "They are trying to push me to the wall." Unverified though it remains, the statement resonates because it fits the pattern. A man trapped by insomnia, compressed by expectation, moving inside a vortex that offered no pause. Within the entertainment community, another belief quietly circulated, that Michael felt driven by an invisible system, compelling his return at any cost. There was no named architect, no single decision-maker, only the shared sense that he was caught inside a mechanism larger than any individual. To the outside world, it was a historic opportunity. To Michael, it sometimes felt like the only path forward, yet one that led not to relief, but to greater strain. What intensified this chapter was Michael's nature itself. He was profoundly sensitive, attuned to every shift in energy, every unspoken judgment. Despite global acclaim, he continued to navigate scrutiny shaped by prejudice rooted in his origins. It was rarely articulated, but insiders acknowledged it as a constant undercurrent, keeping him in a state of quiet defense. For someone who had carried emotional wounds since childhood, that pressure never truly receded. The paradox was stark. The more depleted he became, the more strength was demanded of him. He was labeled an icon, and icons are not expected to falter. So he endured, stood tall under lights, spoke steadily in meetings, performed as required. Yet once doors closed, witnesses recalled him leaning against walls as though the structure holding everything together might give way if he let go. A member of the tour's medical team later described sleepless nights as small storms behind the scenes. Everyone understood the risk when rest failed to come, but no one wanted it spoken aloud. It was dismissed as internal business, something not meant to surface. In retrospect, it became one of the most critical elements of the tragedy, a factor impossible to ignore. It was during this period that the so-called industry secrets emerged, not conspiracies, but a harsher truth. The system is not designed for vulnerability. Fatigue is met with brief pauses, while schedules continue unchecked. Exhaustion is met with encouragement to push harder, while financial pressure remains relentless. Procedurally sound, perhaps, but devastating when imposed on someone already breaking inside. By then, the phrase, "they're trying to kill me," was no longer an isolated remark. It had become a fixation, not about any one person, but about the sensation of being steadily pushed beyond endurance. A spiritual exhaustion invisible to most, yet heavy enough to bend the strongest will. This chapter ends with Michael standing at the edge of emotional collapse, where even the smallest force could tip everything beyond recovery. What followed would soon make that fear tragically real. That evening, the atmosphere inside Michael's private room felt so compressed that merely crossing the threshold stirred an unspoken unease. No one voiced it, yet everyone present sensed the severe strain tightening around him in those final days. The rehearsal schedule had become relentlessly dense, his frame visibly thinner, his voice worn and raspy. Most telling, however, were his eyes, dimmed in a way that made those around him instinctively want to reach out and steady him. Michael spoke little, but his silence conveyed more than any explanation could have. It was during this period that he came to rely on his personal physician as a final conduit to something increasingly rare: rest. Subsequent legal records would later confirm that a potent sleep-inducing medication was administered to help him finally settle. That fact is not in dispute. Yet in that moment, no one framed it as danger. Michael was simply too exhausted to consider alternatives. What he sought was the brief mercy of closing his eyes without anxiety pulling him back awake. Those who witnessed the last rehearsals recalled moments when Michael stood motionless on stage, as though trying to regain balance with himself. Once he braced both hands against the back of a chair, breathing heavily, then offered a smile meant to reassure everyone around him. But his eyes told a different story, clouded, depleted, carrying a quiet, undefined fear. One crew member later admitted they wished they had recognized it sooner, wished they had pulled him out of that cycle, even briefly. By then, however, the cycle had advanced too far. According to official testimony, the night before the tragedy, he again failed to sleep. He paced the room, occasionally stopping in front of a mirror, as if silently asking how much longer he could endure. No one heard the question, yet those closest to him described his gaze as belonging to a man locked in combat with an unseen weight pressing against his back. That weight had no single form. It was the cumulative force of pressure, expectation, professional obligation, physical depletion, and emotional wounds carried across a lifetime. Backstage, a rumor circulated that hours before that night, Michael had confided to someone close, "They're trying to kill me. Everything is too much." There was no recording, no corroborating document, only recollection. Still, the words unsettled everyone who heard them because they aligned so precisely with his condition. He was not expressing fear of a specific assailant. He was articulating the sensation of being crushed by a system whose demands left no space to breathe. In later testimony, his physician acknowledged administering the sleep aid because Michael pleaded for relief, overcome by exhaustion. That account stands. Yet when examined against Michael's psychological state at the time, the narrative extends beyond a single sleepless night. It becomes the culmination of months spent battling his body, his spirit, and an industry unwilling to permit him even a brief pause. One lesser-known detail emerges from a tour member's recollection. Days earlier, Michael spoke quietly about solitude. It was not a confession, merely a sentence that slipped out as he turned toward them, his voice so faint it seemed to dissolve midair. "I am afraid of the things I cannot see." In hindsight, the words read like a personal prophecy. He had lived long enough in both brilliance and shadow to understand that the most frightening forces are often invisible, working silently from within. By the time his physician entered the room that night, Michael was nearly spent. He attempted a few words, offered a fragile smile, less reassurance than self-encouragement. What occurred once the door closed is known only through investigation records, which confirmed that assistance was given to induce sleep. It was on that night that control finally slipped away. What rends the heart is not only what followed, but the sense that Michael had foreseen it. The fragmented expressions of fear, the repeated line, "They're trying to kill me," as a natural response to relentless pressure, the moments in rehearsal when the light in his eyes no longer returned. Together, these fragments assemble a tragic portrait of an artist struggling against the very vortex the world had constructed around him. That night, Michael's star did not vanish at once. It flickered, trembled, clinging to the last remnants of a gentler life long out of reach. The bitter irony is that what he needed most was rest, and that was the one thing the industry, the pressure, and his own exhaustion would not allow. And when dawn finally crept into the room the next day, nothing was ever the same again. The morning after that night steeped in unease, the world awoke to a silence that felt unusually dense, almost procedural in its finality. Michael's music still lingered in the airwaves, but it no longer carried its former ease or celebration. It sounded like an echo from a place everyone recognized, yet rarely examined closely. A place where a man had spent his entire life illuminating others, while never finding a light gentle enough to rest within himself. Those closest to him would later describe that morning as one where something essential had quietly stopped moving. Family members, crew, longtime friends all carried the same unspoken weight, a realization that they should have understood him more deeply. they should have paused, looked past the makeup and the familiar smile, and studied the exhaustion in his eyes. But history does not move on conditional statements, and the entertainment industry, by design, does not stop its machinery for reflection, not even for its most celebrated figures. When the official announcement came, attention turned backward. People began reconstructing the final months with the precision of an investigation, re-examining details that once seemed ordinary, the relentless rehearsals, the moments when Michael stood motionless on stage. The fragmented words someone recalled hearing in passing. "They're trying to kill me." In hindsight, these fragments felt less like coincidence and more like signals. Not a warning of a specific threat, but an articulation of overwhelm, a man pushed to the limits of endurance. That phrase settled into his final narrative like a dissonant note, one that grew more painful the longer it was studied. Predictably, rumors followed. Voices emerged from those who had never met him, speaking of hidden plots and dark conspiracies. But no verifiable evidence supported such claims. The industry secret Michael faced was not mystical or cinematic. It was structural and familiar, an industry capable of elevating a person to godlike status, while simultaneously pulling them into a vortex that does not release until everything is spent. What is less often spoken aloud but quietly acknowledged by those who loved him is that Michael carried this burden long before his final years. From childhood onward, he was conditioned to prove his worth constantly, not only through talent, but within a world shaped by prejudice and relentless scrutiny. Despite unprecedented success, he lived with a lingering sense that he had to work harder than others to be seen as legitimate. One person close to him summarized it simply. Michael was fragile inside. He felt everything. That observation resurfaced repeatedly after his passing, offering a lens through which his long-held anxieties finally made sense. In the days that followed, his music became the sole language through which the world could grieve. Old songs were replayed. Rehearsal footage was revisited. Conversations with crew members were heard again with new attention. A choreographer later admitted that upon rewatching the "This Is It" recordings, they recognized something they had missed before. A man exerting immense effort to light up everything around him, while the flame sustaining him was quietly fading. At that point, Michael was no longer just the story of an exhausted performer. He became a symbol of a life lived at the intersection of adoration and pressure, love and expectation, brilliance and damage. Every article, every recollection that followed circled the same unanswered question. One few dared to confront directly. Did the world ever truly understand Michael Jackson? His pain was never theatrical. It was slow, internal, spreading quietly through sleepless nights and silent moments. It came from decades of needing to validate his existence under constant observation, shaped by growing up within a community marked by profound inequity. Even as he transcended boundaries and achieved global dominance, those imprints never disappeared. They simply retreated beneath the stage lights, waiting for moments of vulnerability to resurface. The world mourned him as one mourns a familiar presence. Yet the most difficult realization arrived afterward. Michael had been trying to communicate his struggle for a very long time. In brief remarks, prolonged silences, and the way he glanced back after leaving a room. These were not accidents, but traces of a soul searching for relief. When he finally stepped away from the lights, he was called a legend. For those who understood the fuller picture, that title carried both honor and sorrow. Because the cost of that greatness was immense: sleep, peace, childhood, and the belief that life could ever be gentle with him. His legacy remains written in extraordinary brilliance, but it is inseparable from deep shadow. And when his name is spoken in the future, people will remember not only the voice and the movement, but also a sentence weighted with profound isolation. "They're trying to kill me." The specifics of what he meant may never be known. What endures is what the phrase represents: a soul intensely sensitive, profoundly weary, yet determined to stand until the final moment. Michael is gone, But his story, with all its light and darkness, will endure as a reminder that no legend is forged by glory alone. Some stars burn brightest only after they have already begun to fracture from within. In closing, the record of Michael Jackson's life reads not merely as the rise of a legendary artist, but as a case study in what profoundly sensitive individuals endure when caught in a relentless convergence of expectation and unforgiving light. From the recurring phrase, "They're trying to kill me," to the documented moments in which he appeared to brace himself against pressures no one could see, a consistent picture emerges. A man struggling to preserve his inner core within a system that never ceased to demand more. While questions and ambiguities surrounding his final years remain unresolved, the most critical conclusion lies elsewhere, in recognizing the depth of solitude he carried, often unnoticed, throughout his life. When viewed through this lens, his story is less about mystery and more about understanding, an enduring reminder that brilliance can coexist with vulnerability, and that even the most celebrated figures may be fighting silently to hold themselves together in a world that offers little pause.